A call that rang exactly 3 times tore my life in two. The lawyer said, "Mr. Silas Ashbourne wants to see you before he dies." I have lived as an orphan for 34 years, or so I believed, until I saw my own portrait hanging in the grand hall of a Bayshore, Maryland mansion. If this history is real, who buried it, and why did they need me to never find out? My name is Eden Whitaker. I am 34 years old, and I am an investigative auditor for the Northbridge Compliance Unit. My job is to find the ghosts in the machine, the numerical anomalies that prove billion-dollar lies. I am good at it because I trust nothing but the numbers. I had just clicked send on the final report of the Pierpoint embezzlement file. 7 months of work, culminating in 3 neatly bound volumes that would put a shipping executive in federal prison for the next 15 years. The numbers did not lie. He had been siphoning funds through a network of shell companies in Panama, each transaction a whisper, but together they roared. I felt the familiar, cold satisfaction of a closed loop. The ledger was balanced. I was stretching, feeling the vertebrae in my back pop, when the private line on my desk, the one I never used, began to ring. The sound was sharp, invasive, cutting through the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant tapping of keyboards. I let it ring twice. A third time, I picked up. Whitaker. The voice on the other end was old, dry as parchment, and precise. "Ms. Eden Whitaker, my name is Camden Doyle. I am the legal representative for Silas Ashbourne." The name meant nothing to me. It was a data point without a file. "If this is about a donation to Northbridge, you'll need to speak with our public liaison." "It is not," the voice said, unflappable. "Mr. Ashbourne is a former admiral of the United States Navy and, for lack of a better term, a significant industrialist. He is currently at his estate in Bayshore, Maryland. He is dying." I waited. The silence of my office pressed in. I could hear my colleague, Ben, crunching on an apple 2 cubes over. "He wishes to see you," Doyle continued. "I think you have the wrong person. I don't know any." "He wishes," the lawyer interrupted, his tone sharpening almost imperceptibly, "to see his granddaughter." The fluorescent light above my desk flickered. I stared at the buzzing tube, and the world went out of focus. Granddaughter. The word was absurd. It was a technical impossibility, a catastrophic failure of data. "You have the wrong person," I said, my voice flat, final. "My file is quite clear. I'm a state orphan. My parents died in a car accident in 1991. I have no living relatives. The state of Virginia certified this 30 years ago. I had seen the file. I had pulled it myself when I was 22, needing to see the black and white of my own foundation. It was thin. A car crash. 2 names. No extended family listed. Case closed. I was a child of the system." "Ms. Whitaker," Doyle said, and for the first time, I detected a sliver of something that wasn't professional duty, perhaps pity, perhaps impatience. "Your file is incorrect. Silas Ashbourne is your maternal grandfather. He is aware of the official narrative. He is the one who constructed it. He has, and I quote, a great deal to explain, and very little time in which to do it." I hung up the phone. I did not slam it down. I placed the receiver gently back in its cradle, disconnecting the impossible link. But the connection was not broken. The sound in the office had changed. Ben's apple crunching was a gunshot. The rhythmic tapping of the keyboards was a coded message I could not decipher. The hum of the lights was a scream. I stood up, my chair rolling back silently on the industrial carpet. I walked out of the main office, through the glass doors, and into the gray corridor. I did not go to the break room. I went to the file room. Not the office file room, but the one I kept in my head. For 34 years, I had lived with a sealed history. It was a fact, absolute and unquestioned. Now, a stranger's voice had taken a hammer to it. I went home. I told my supervisor I had a sudden migraine, a lie that tasted like acid. My real migraine was just beginning. My apartment is a study in minimalism. White walls, gray furniture, Glass tables. There are no photographs. There are no plants. There is a wall of binders, neatly labeled, detailing my past case files. It is a life curated to have no messy attachments, no unexplained variables. Except for one. In the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, beneath my archived tax returns, is a small, wooden cigar box. It is the only thing I have kept from the group homes. It contains the entire inventory of my past. My hands were shaking. Eden Whittaker, who had faced down CFOs who could buy and sell countries, was trembling as I lifted the lid. The contents were sparse: a silver necklace, the chain so fine it was almost invisible, with a small, stylized swallow in flight, a photograph, and a single baby bracelet from the hospital. The plastic yellowed, the name card blank. I ignored the bracelet. I ignored the necklace I wore every single day, tucked beneath my shirt. I focused on the photograph. It was old. The colors faded to a pale yellow and blue. A man in a naval dress uniform, the kind I recognized from military parades I had audited, was holding a newborn baby. The man's face was out of focus, blurred by the light, but the uniform was sharp. He was looking down at the bundle. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a looping script. EGW, always safe. My name is Eden Grace Whittaker. I sat on my cold, hardwood floor, the photograph in one hand, my phone in the other. The foundation of my life, the concrete slab of Orphan, upon which I had built everything, was cracking. The crack ran from that inscription, EGW, straight to the words of the lawyer, Silas Ashbourne. My investigator's mind, clawing its way back from the shock, rebooted. It began to build a new file. Hypothesis A. Inheritance scam. This was the most likely. A rich old man is dying. His manipulative lawyer, Doyle, needs a long-lost heir to validate a false claim, perhaps to contest a will or unlock a trust. They find a high-functioning, unattached orphan with a vague background. They seed a few clues. They lure me in. Motive. Money. Means a well-researched, predatory legal maneuver. Hypothesis B. Concealed identity. The narrative Doyle presented is true. I am the granddaughter of a wealthy, powerful military man. My parents' accident was not an accident. My orphan status was a fabrication, a form of witness protection. Motive, security, means high-level, systemic corruption involving state records, law enforcement, and naval intelligence. I felt a cold dread mix with a sharper, more familiar sensation, the thrill of the hunt. Hypothesis. A was messy, emotional. Hypothesis B was a machine, logical, terrifying. And the photograph, the man in uniform, the initials. They all pointed to B. My phone buzzed on the floor, startling me. A new text message, from a number I did not recognize, but I knew it was Doyle. The message was 5 words. If you come, I will show you the house. The house. Not his house or the estate, the house, as if it were a character, a witness, a co-conspirator. This was no longer a question of feeling, it was a question of evidence. A scammer offers you money, a man with a secret offers you proof. I looked around my empty, silent apartment. The binders of my past work seemed sterile, meaningless. I had spent my entire adult life meticulously auditing the lives of others. I had balanced their books, exposed their secrets, and filed them away, all while my own ledger was a complete fabrication. I realized, with a sudden, hollow clarity, that I had nothing to bind me here. No husband, no children, no pets, not even a dying plant. I had mistaken an absence of connection for a state of control. I was unattached, untethered, the perfect person to disappear for a few days, or the perfect person to be disappeared. I stood up. The decision was made. I opened my laptop. I booked an urgent, one-way flight to Baltimore, the closest major airport to Bayshore, Maryland. I packed a small, nondescript black carry-on, 2 changes of clothes, my secure laptop, a set of lockpicks I'm not technically supposed to own, and a burner phone. I sent an email to my supervisor stating my migraine was severe and I would be taking personal leave, effective immediately. I knew it would damage my credibility. I did not care. I kept the cigar box open on my table, but I took the necklace. I fastened the silver swallow around my neck, letting it sit outside my shirt. It felt cold against my skin. On the flight, the cabin air felt thin. The plane was dark, an overnight red-eye. I did not sleep. I stared out the window at the blackness, and I reconstructed my life. I built a new timeline. Age 4, group home, the smell of industrial lye soap and oatmeal. Age 7, moved to a state-funded boarding school. It was strict, almost military run. We wore uniforms. We marched. Age 14, placed with a foster family near a naval base. The foster father was a quiet man, a logistics officer. Age 18, a scholarship to college. Not just any scholarship, a fully funded, anonymous grant, contingent on my majoring in forensic accounting. My entire life, which I had always seen as a series of random, unfortunate events managed by an inefficient state bureaucracy, suddenly looked like a pre-programmed path. The scent of lye soap, the sound of marching boots, the proximity to naval bases. Were they random fragments, or were they clues I had been trained to ignore? I decided then, this was not a family reunion. This was a case, my most important one. I would approach it as such. Every person, from Camden Doyle to the dying Silas Ashbourne, was a subject of interest, not a relative. Every object, from the estate itself to the photo in my pocket, was evidence. And my emotions, the sickening lurch of fear and the nascent, dangerous flicker of hope, they were to be sealed, tagged, bagged, and stored. My feelings were a liability, a contaminant to the clean room of the investigation. I landed in Maryland as the sun was rising, a watery gray light over the Chesapeake. I felt no fatigue. I felt only the cold, sharp focus of an audit about to begin. But as I stepped into the rental car, one question hammered against the seal I had placed on my heart. It was not an auditor's question. It was the question of the child in the blank hospital bracelet. If I was not an orphan, who wrote that sentence for me? Who signed the order that condemned me to a life without a name? And why? The rental car's tires crunched on gravel, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the damp, heavy air of the Maryland shore. The GPS had routed me off the main highway 10 minutes ago, onto a winding road canopied by ancient, drooping oaks. Now, I was on a private drive labeled Oaks Lane. The gravel was dark, almost black, and meticulously raked, an expense. The trees broke, and I stopped the car. A set of black iron gates, at least 12 feet high, blocked the path. The design was intricate, a series of forged anchors and stylized waves, all converging on a central crest, a swallow diving toward an anchor. My fingers instinctively went to my neck, to the silver charm hidden beneath my shirt. Coincidence was a luxury I did not deal in. As I watched, the gates began to swing inward, moving with a slow hydraulic sigh. No guard, no call box. They were expecting me. I drove through. Ahead, at the end of the long drive, I saw it, a flag, the stars and stripes, hung at half-mast against the gray sky. The pole was positioned on a perfect circle of lawn in front of the house. Ashbourne House. It was not a home. It was a statement of power, built to intimidate. It was 3 stories of cold, white stone, stark against the dark green of the surrounding forest. A row of massive Doric columns supported a deep portico, creating shadows so deep they looked like caves. The windows were tall, dark rectangles, and as I pulled the car to a stop, I felt the distinct, prickling sensation of being observed. The windows were not windows, they were eyes, old, judgmental, and all-seeing. The front door, a heavy slab of dark wood, opened before I had even switched off the engine. The man who stood under the portico matched the voice on the phone, old, precise, and dry. Camden Doyle. He was tall, thin as a rail, and wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that must have cost $5,000. His gray hair was thin, but his posture was perfect. He looked less like a lawyer and more like an undertaker who had just secured a very profitable contract. I got out of the car, grabbing my black carry-on. I left the burner phone in the glove box. I wanted to see their security protocols first. "Ms. Whitaker," he said. It was not a question. His eyes, pale blue and magnified slightly by his glasses, were not welcoming. They were assessing. It was the look of a man prepared for a cross-examination. "Mr. Doyle?" I replied, matching his flat tone. He nodded once, a curt gesture toward the open doorway. "We should not wait. His condition is—" He paused, searching for a word. "Volatile." He led me inside. The interior was a shock. The cold, stark exterior gave way to an almost oppressive display of dark wood, red carpet, and brass. The air was still, heavy, and smelled of old wax, lemon oil, and something metallic, like old pennies. It was the smell of preserved history. We were in a grand entrance hall, the ceiling soaring 2 stories above us. A massive, unlit chandelier hung in the void, but my eyes were drawn to the walls. The entire length of the hallway was a gallery of portraits. "The Ashbourne line," Doyle said, his voice echoing slightly. "Since 1742, men, and a few severe-looking women, stared down from their ornate frames. Every single man was in uniform: colonial militia, War of 1812 naval dress, Civil War blue, First World War khaki, and then, dominating the far end, a sea of modern naval dress whites and service dress blues. This was not a family. It was a dynasty. I kept my eyes forward, treating them as I would any other fixture. They were data. They were the past. They had no bearing on my case. I walked with my auditor's gait, measured, quiet, and observant. The runner down the hall was Persian, the thread count astronomical, the brass fixtures were hand-polished, the silence was absolute, broken only by our footsteps. And one other sound. From somewhere above, faint but unmistakable, came the rhythmic, artificial sigh of a machine, a hiss, a click, a pause, a hiss, a click, a pause. It was a ventilator, a medical respirator. It was the sound of a deadline. I was halfway down the hall, my focus on the grand staircase at the end, when Doyle stopped. He did not turn to me, but simply paused, his gaze fixed on the wall to his left. I followed his line of sight, and the breath caught in my throat. I stopped. It was a painting, an oil painting, 3 feet by 4, in a heavy gilded frame, lit by its own picture lamp. The subject was a woman in her early 30s, standing not in a drawing room, but against a sterile, modern backdrop that looked like a high-rise office window. She wore a dark gray business suit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe functional bun. She was holding a blue document binder, the kind used for financial reports. Her expression was neutral, her gaze directed slightly past the viewer, as if focused on a distant problem. On her left brow, rendered in a tiny, meticulous stroke of lighter paint, was a small white scar, the souvenir of a fall from a bicycle when I was 9. It was me. I had never seen this painting. I had never sat for this painting, but it was me, captured with an auditor's precision. I stared, my carefully constructed emotional firewall crumbling. This changed everything. Hypothesis A, the inheritance scam, evaporated. Scammers do not commission $1,000 oil paintings of their marks. They do not know about scars hidden by makeup and professional indifference. This was surveillance. This was long-term, intimate, and obsessive. My voice came out colder than I intended. When Doyle finally turned to look at me, his expression was unreadable. He commissioned it last year. From a press photograph, when you broke the Pierpoint fraud case, he hesitated. He was immensely proud. He said the artist captured your strategic focus. He knows details of my life, my career, my face, my scar. My mind was racing, rebuilding the file. Subject, Silas Ashbourne. Connection. Grandfather. Alleged. History. Unknown. But includes long-range, covert monitoring of subject Eden Whitaker. Motive. Control. Penance. Possession. The hiss-click pause of the respirator echoed down the stairs. The clock was ticking. "Before we go up," Doyle said, gesturing to a small doorway to our right, tucked under the grand staircase, "there is one more piece of context." He led me into a room that was less a room and more a shrine. It was small, paneled in the same dark wood, and lit only by angled lights inside built-in display cases. It was a military museum, but a personal one. Swords, medals, folded flags, and navigation tools were laid out on velvet backing. My eyes scanned them, cataloging: a Navy Cross, a Distinguished Service Medal, silver stars, a career of valor, or at least a career of recognized conflict. Doyle stopped in front of a central case. This. Inside, two objects sat side by side on a bed of dark blue velvet. One was a Naval Aviator's Medal of Honor. It was pristine. The other was a hospital document, a standard-issue state adoption card, the kind I had seen versions of in my own file, except this one was torn, ripped violently in half from top to bottom. The two halves were placed together, but the tear was jagged, a wound. My eyes snapped to the data fields. Mother's name, illegible. Father's name, illegible. But the most chilling detail was the line for the child. Child's name, redacted. It was not redacted. The paper itself had been physically altered. The name had been scraped away. The fibers of the paper roughed up and torn, leaving a cloudy, abraded wound where a name should have been. Someone had taken a blade and meticulously, violently, erased an identity. My identity. My mind flashed to my own file. Parents deceased, car accident, a clean, sterile, bureaucratic lie. This was a crime scene. This was evidence of destruction. My auditor's mind posed the critical questions, cold and sharp, cutting through the shock. Who erased the name? And more importantly, how did they make that erasure cascade through the entire state system? To change one document is simple. To change the system, to make an orphan, requires a network. It requires power. "He wanted you to see that first," Doyle said quietly, "so you would understand the nature of the situation." I looked from the torn paper to the Medal of Honor, valor and violence, side by side. I turned and walked out of the room, Doyle following. The respirator sound was louder now, calling us. We stood at the base of the grand staircase. The wooden steps were old, the centers worn slightly from a century of footsteps. Each step looked like it would creak. Each one felt like a new question, a new layer of the lie I had to ascend. "This way," Doyle said. He led the way. My foot touched the first step. The wood groaned, a low, aching sound that echoed in the massive hall. I followed him up. The landing was dark. The hallway on the second floor was a contrast to the one below. It was functional, almost sterile. The smell, I realized, was stronger here. Lavender, yes, but layered over the sharp, chemical tang of disinfectant and the faint, sweet sick odor of illness. Doyle stopped outside a set of double doors at the end of the hall. He put a hand on the brass handle, then paused. He looked at me, his gaze finally softening for a fraction of a second. "He is not the man he was. Be prepared." He opened the doors. The smell of lavender and antiseptic washed over me, a suffocating wave. The room was dark, the heavy curtains drawn, the only light coming from the glowing green and blue readouts of a bank of medical equipment by the bed. And the only sound was the hiss-click pause of the machine that was breathing for the man who claimed to be my family. I stepped across the threshold, my hand instinctively touching the silver swallow at my neck. This was not a reunion. This was not about finding a grandfather. This was an audit of an architecture of lies, and I was here to find the cornerstone. The air in the room was a physical weight. It was thick with the competing, cloying scents of lavender air fresheners plugged into the wall sockets, and the sharp, sterile tang of medical-grade disinfectant. Beneath both, there was a third, sweeter, and more unsettling smell, the scent of a body failing, of old paper and dust. The only sounds were the ones that measured time and sustained life. The rhythmic, metronomic, hiss-click pause of the ventilator, the steady electronic beep of the heart monitor, each beat a green spike on a dark screen. A tall mahogany grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging in a silent, mocking arc. The ticking had been disabled. I stood 3 feet inside the doorway, my carry-on still in my hand. My eyes, trained to find anomalies in data, adjusted to the gloom. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, admitting no daylight. The room was illuminated only by the green and blue glow of the medical array and a single low-wattage lamp on a side table, which cast the furniture in long, distorted shadows. Camden Doyle remained by the door, a silent sentinel. A uniformed nurse, built like a linebacker, sat in a chair in the farthest, darkest corner, her presence a silent, professional judgment. And in the center of the room, dwarfed by a massive carved wooden headboard that looked like it had been stolen from a cathedral, was the man. Silas Ashbourne. He was a ruin. The portraits downstairs had shown men of vigor, of command, of brutal certainty. The man in the bed was a framework, a skeleton draped in pale, translucent skin. He was well over 80, and the years had hollowed him out. He was propped up on a mountain of white pillows, a clear oxygen mask strapped over his face, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that beeped and sighed beside him. But the description ended there, because he turned his head, and he opened his eyes. They were not the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes from the portraits. They were pale blue, almost gray, and burned with a shocking, undiluted intensity. They were sharp as a dagger, the eyes of an admiral on the bridge, scanning the horizon for an enemy. They fixed on me instantly, bypassing Doyle, bypassing the nurse, and in that moment, I felt the full, crushing weight of his focus. He saw me. He knew me. His hand, thin and blue-veined, moved to the mask. The nurse in the corner made a small, warning sound, a tisk. He ignored her. With a weak, rattling breath, he pulled the mask aside. The heart monitor's tempo immediately became erratic. "Eden," he said. His voice was not the dry rasp of an invalid. It was a command. Though spoken on a thread of air, a low, gravelly baritone that had likely commanded fleets, now reduced to a whisper that still managed to fill the room. He did not ask. He stated. He said my name, my full name. Eden Grace Whitaker. It was an arrow, fired from the bed, and it struck me square in the chest. Hearing the name my state file had given me, the name I had built my entire life upon, spoken by the man who allegedly erased my true one, was a profound dislocation. My training kicked in. My body, which had worked with military contractors and audited naval bases, snapped into a posture I had learned from them, not a salute, but a form of at ease that was anything but. My back straightened. My shoulders went square. My chin lifted. I became, in that instant, Investigator Whitaker. But my right hand, the one not holding my bag, betrayed me. It moved to my chest, my fingers closing around the small, hard outline of the silver swallow pendant beneath my shirt, the one piece of evidence I could not file away. I was the auditor, and I was the case file, occupying the same space. Silas Ashbourne held my gaze. The silence stretched, filled only by the unsteady beeping of the monitor. He was assessing me, just as I was assessing him. He was seeing the woman in the portrait. I was seeing the man who had signed the order. "You came," he whispered. "I'm here." My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that ran up my arm from the pendant. He took a slow, painful breath. The effort seemed immense. Good, good. He stared at me for another long moment, his eyes tracing the line of my jaw, my hair, the scar on my brow I knew he could see even in the dim light. "I chose silence," he said. the words a confession delivered as a verdict. I chose it, to keep you safe. The words hung in the antiseptic air. Safe. He had used the word. The same word carved on the back of the photograph. Always safe. It was the justification of a tyrant, the excuse of a coward. The auditor in my head stepped aside. The orphan stepped forward. No, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the hum of the machines. You chose silence to keep yourself from sin, or perhaps to keep yourself from consequence. Safe is just the word you use to balance your own ledger. A flicker of something, not surprise, not anger, perhaps respect. The dagger-like eyes narrowed. He had expected, I realized, a grieving child, a tearful reunion. He had not expected an audit. His gaze dropped from my face to the nightstand beside him. On it, next to a plastic cup of water and a bottle of pills, sat a small, dark wooden box. It was old, the wood polished smooth, possibly mahogany, with brass inlay on the corners. He lifted his trembling hand, the one not attached to an IV, and tried to reach for it. His fingers, gnarled with arthritis and age, strained, brushing the lid but unable to grasp it. The effort sent a new alarm through the monitor. The beeping quickened. I watched him struggle, every instinct in my body. The polite, conditioned responses of a civilized person screamed at me to help him, to take one step, pick up the box, and hand it to him. I did not move. My body was rigid. I would not bridge the gap. I would not be his assistant, his caregiver, his compliant granddaughter. I was his accuser. Helping him was a contamination of the evidence. His hand fell back to the sheets, a pale, defeated thing. He closed his eyes for a second, a spasm of frustration or pain passing over his face. Camden Doyle, silent until now, took a single, quiet step into the room. His voice was a low murmur, meant to soothe, to control. Sir, perhaps we are moving too quickly. Ms. Whitaker is still processing. The house. The house, Silas interrupted, his eyes snapping open, the fire returning. The house is a tomb of records. She needs the key. Then give it to me, I said. The challenge was laid. The room, which had been tense, became pressurized. The nurse in the corner had stopped her pretense of ignoring us. Her head was up, and she was watching. I took one step forward, dropping my bag by my feet. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. I am not here for an inheritance, Mr. Ashbourne, I said, formally. I am not here for a reunion. I am a forensic auditor. My entire life, my entire identity is a fraudulent file, a forgery, and forgeries have authors. I am here for a name. I stood by the foot of his bed, close enough to see the web of broken capillaries on his cheeks, close enough to smell the true scent of his illness. I have one question, I said, my voice dropping to the register I used for final depositions. Everything else is just noise. Who signed my death certificate? I had expected a lie, a justification, a deflection. I did not expect what he gave me. Silas Ashbourne, the former admiral, the industrialist, the man who had commissioned a portrait of a woman he had never met, did the one thing that confirmed his guilt more than any confession. He broke eye contact. His head turned, slowly, toward the dark, curtained window. He looked away from me, away from the light of the monitors, and stared into the blackness. He did not answer. It was his first evasion. It was the first no comment from a subject who knew the answer was incriminating. He had built this architecture of lies, and he would not give me the blueprint. The silence that followed was brutal. It was filled with my rage and his shame, and it was broken by the machines. A new alarm, a high-pitched, insistent, terrifying squeal. The green line on the heart monitor, which had been erratic, flattened into a frantic, jagged spike, and then stuttered. "Code," the nurse snapped, her voice suddenly a thunderclap. She was on her feet, lunging toward the bed, hitting a red button on the wall. The room was instantly flooded with a harsh, overhead fluorescent light, revealing everything: the dust motes, the stains on the rug, the waxy, gray pallor of Silas's face. "Doyle, get her out!" the nurse shouted, already fitting the oxygen mask back on Silas's face, her hands moving with a precise, practiced violence. Doyle's hand was on my elbow. "We must go, now, Ms. Whitaker." I did not resist. I was frozen. The man, the only link to my case, was dying. He was escaping. Doyle was pulling me toward the door. The double doors burst open again, and two more medical staff, a man and a woman in scrubs, ran in, pushing a crash cart. "He's in VTAC, pushing Amio," one of them yelled. I was in the hallway. The doors slammed shut in my face. The alarms were muffled, the shouting a distant chaos. I stood in the dark, silent corridor, my blood pounding in my ears. Doyle was beside me, breathing heavily, straightening his suit jacket. I had failed. The interrogation was over. He had evaded me. I turned to go, to get my bag, to leave this house of lies. The door to the bedroom opened again. Just a crack. It was Silas. He was not there. But his voice was. It was a low, desperate hiss. The nurse must have been occupied. "Eden," he breathed, the sound barely audible. I pressed myself back to the door. Doyle forgotten. "Don't trust," he gasped. A pause. The sound of the monitor's alarm. "Don't trust any tests. Any of them. Not tonight." I felt the words like a physical chill. "What?" "The tests," he whispered, frantic. "They'll give you tests. Don't trust them." The door was pulled fully shut from the inside, the lock clicking. I stood back, my mind racing. A warning, not about the past, but about the present, about tonight. Tests, plural. What tests? DNA. It had to be DNA. And don't trust any tests they give you. This was not just about him and me. There was another player in the game. Someone in this house. Someone who would want to test me. Someone who would, he implied, fabricate the results. I had come here to audit a 30-year-old lie, only to find myself in the middle of a brand new one being written. I looked at Camden Doyle. His face was pale. His composure finally cracked. He knew what I had heard. I turned away from him and from the closed door. I walked down the grand staircase, the smell of lavender and antiseptic clinging to me. I was leaving the room, but the smell of cold metal, the smell of the machines and the crash cart, followed me all the way down. The case had just become active. The chaos from upstairs was a muffled, high-frequency panic, insulated by thick walls and a century of heavy carpets. Camden Doyle did not try to explain. He simply stood with me in the grand, silent entrance hall, his back to the staircase, a living barrier between me and the medical emergency. The house staff, who had materialized from unseen hallways during the alarm, had just as quickly vanished. We were alone. Doyle's composure was back, but it was a thinner, more brittle version. He was a man holding a fractured piece of porcelain together with sheer willpower. He was, I realized, terrified. Not of the medical crisis, but of me, of what I represented, a variable he could not control. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, his voice returning to its dry, lawyerly tone. "The Admiral is resilient. They will stabilize him." "You knew he was going to warn me," I stated. It was not a question. "His warning implies a threat, a current one. Who is they?" Doyle's gaze flickered, the first sign of a poorly constructed lie. "He is an old man. Under immense stress and medication, he can be paranoid. I am an auditor. Mr. Doyle, paranoia is just a heightened state of data analysis." He was specific. "Tests. Plural. Who in this house wants my DNA and is willing to falsify the results?" He flinched. The word falsify struck him. "You are moving too fast. You do not have the context." "Then give it to me." He seemed to come to a decision. The lawyer, who had been a gatekeeper, was now repositioning himself, perhaps as a guide, or perhaps as a new, more subtle kind of jailer. He anticipated this, Doyle said. He reached not into his briefcase, but into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the one over his heart. He produced a large, thick manila envelope. It was not a modern, self-adhering envelope. This was old world. It was sealed on the back with a circle of dark red, almost black, wax. Impressed into the wax was the crest I had seen on the front gate, the diving swallow, and the anchor. He held it out to me. I took it. The envelope was heavy, the paper thick, and the wax was still sharp at the edges. It had not been handled much. He instructed me to give this to you, Doyle said. Only after you had met him, he said, and I quote, "She has to see the ruin before she can understand the foundation." I looked from the envelope to his face. And the medical theater just now? Was that part of the context? That, Doyle said, his face paling, was not. That was, I fear, the consequence of your interrogation. You must understand, the Admiral has not been challenged by anyone, least of all family, in decades. He gestured down the hall, away from the stairs, toward a set of dark, carved double doors. The library. He requested you review these documents in there. It is, he believes, the most secure room in the house. I walked, he followed. He pushed open the doors, and I was hit by the scent of old leather, paper, and floor wax. The library was 2 stories tall, a cathedral of books, all dark wood and green leather, with a rolling ladder and a brass rail. It was the room of a man who did not read, but who collected. I will arrange for some tea, Doyle said, and I will inquire as to the Admiral's status. I don't want tea, Mr. Doyle. I want an hour, alone. His lips thinned. He wanted to object. He was the guardian of the secrets, and he had just handed me the index. Of course, the doors lock from the inside. He pulled them shut. I heard the faint click of the latch, and then, satisfyingly, the scrape of my own thumb turning the heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt. I was alone, secure. I was in the vault. I laid the heavy envelope on the massive, polished desk. I did not use the letter opener provided. I slit the bottom edge with a thin carbon fiber blade I carry in my wallet. I would not disturb the seal. The seal was evidence. I slid the contents out. It was a folder, not a stack of loose papers. Inside, a life, my life. The first document was a certified copy of a birth certificate, State of Maryland, County of Bayshore. Name, Eden Grace Ashbourne. Mother, Eleanor Grace Ashbourne. Father, redacted. The redacted was not a black bar. It was a formal, typeset, legal redaction, as if the father's identity was a matter of state security. I stared at the name, Eden Grace Ashbourne. It felt foreign, a fraudulent entry in a ledger, and yet, Grace was the G in EIJPW, the name on the back of the photo in my box. My auditor's eye scanned the document not for content, but for error. I checked typeface, alignment, serial numbers. It looked authentic. But my profession had taught me that the most convincing forgeries are the ones that want to be found. I saw it, a recurring typo. In the field for attending physician, Dr. Michael Robertson. In the field for hospital name, Bayshore Memorial. In the field for informant, Eleanor Ashbourne. 3 misspellings, all different. No, not just misspellings. I laid the document flat and looked at the acrostic. The third letter of each misspelled word. Michele, Memorial, Ashbourne. C-M-H, it meant nothing. I re-examined, not the misspelled word, the field name. Attending physician. Hospital name. Informant. H-A-O. I was guessing. I was compromised. I set it aside. My pulse was too fast. I needed to be systematic. The second item, a photograph. A simple 3x5 snapshot. Not a formal portrait. A young woman with a cascade of fiery, untamed red hair, sitting up in a hospital bed. She was smiling, exhausted, and she was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Her smile was pure. There was no artifice in it. She was looking at the baby, not the camera. This was my mother, Eleanor Grace. I felt nothing, a cold, analytical blankness. This was a person I had no data on. She was a ghost. I turned the photo over, no inscription. The third item, a letter, several pages, handwritten on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind embossed with a personal crest, the same anchor and swallow. The handwriting was not the spidery, weak script of a dying man. This was written years ago. It was a strong, angular, aggressive script. "My dearest Eden," it began. I read it twice. It was a confession, structured like a military after-action report. The date, 1998. The context, a covert naval operation off the Horn of Africa. He had led it. They had dismantled a pirate syndicate, the Sons of the Red Sand. The threat, the syndicate's leader, who had escaped, sent a credible, personal threat, not against Silas, but against his bloodline. "We will take your daughter's daughter," the message had said. The recommendation, Naval Intelligence Security, in conjunction with allied private contractors, advised a full identity isolation, a disappearance. He wrote, "Your mother, Eleanor, fought me. She wanted to run, to take you to Argentina. It was sentimental and foolish. I chose the logical path, the secure path. I had you declared an orphan. I built a wall around you made of bureaucracy. I thought I could reverse it when it was safe." The letter ended. It was never safe. The threat was neutralized, but the system I built to hide you was too efficient. And then, May, your mother's cousin, became involved, and the file was sealed, even from me. I have been watching you from afar. I am proud, but I was a coward. I chose security over family. I hope you can understand. I folded the letter. I did not believe it, not fully. Disappearing a child is not a file. It is a network. It requires a doctor to sign off, a hospital to lose records, a state official to process the orphan paperwork, a judge to sign the final order. He was admitting to a conspiracy, but painting himself as a lone, tragic decision-maker. This was not the act of one man. This was the work of a machine. The final item, a military identification card, a standard, laminated, green and white ID. The photo was a grainy 16-year-old picture from my driver's permit. The name, Eden G. Whitaker. The rank, civilian, dependent. And the issue date, the exact date of my 18th birthday. It was a token, a symbolic gesture from a man who, on the day I legally became an adult, created a document that tied me to him, even if he never gave it to me. My hands were shaking. I put the documents back in the folder. My mind was a storm of new, unverified data, pirates, a red-haired mother, a conspiracy. And the misspellings. I went back to the birth certificate. It wasn't the third letter. It was the number of letters in the field name. Attending physician, 19 hospital. Name, 13. Informant, 9. 19, 13, 9. It was a file number, a cabinet number, in a library. I stood up. I looked around the room. The walls were lined with identical, built-in, dark wood filing cabinets, each with a small, brass number plate. They were organized by year. I walked the perimeter. The years went back to the 1700s. But in the far corner, near a globe, was a modern, metal, fireproof filing cabinet. It was jarringly out of place. It had no number. I walked over. It was locked. A standard, high-security pin tumbler lock. I scanned the room, an auditor looking for a discrepancy. The room was perfect. Too perfect. The books were all aligned. The chairs were pushed in, except, on the main desk, a heavy bronze statue of a seagull, wings spread, was sitting slightly askew. It was not aligned with the desk blotter. I walked over. I touched it. It was heavy. I lifted it. Taped to the green felt bottom was a single, small, silver key. I went back to the metal cabinet. The key slid in. The lock turned with a well-oiled, expensive click. I opened the top drawer. It was my life, not the one in the envelope, the one I had lived. It was full of files, organized by year. The first file, age 4, a report from my first group home, a behavioral note. Subject EWW is quiet, non-interactive, hoards small, shiny objects. I slammed it shut. My heart was hammering. This was not surveillance. This was ownership. I opened the next drawer. Age 22, a printout of my college transcript. Age 28, my first major audit. Age 33, I pulled the file. It was thick. It was full of newspaper clippings, printed out web articles, and grainy, long lens photographs of me walking into my office building. Auditor brings down Pierpoint. It was the case Silas had commissioned the portrait from. He had not just seen the press photo, he had the entire archive. He had been watching. I went through the files, my hands moving mechanically. I was auditing my own surveillance. File, file, file. And then, a gap. The files were meticulous. Weekly reports from PIs, academic transcripts, even, disgustingly, a report from a background check on a man I had dated twice. But between age 25 and age 27, there was nothing. 18 months. A black hole in the data. Why? What happened in those 18 months that he did not, or could not, document? The gap was more terrifying than the surveillance itself. At the very back of the drawer, beneath the last file, was a single object, a black, Kingston brand USB drive. A simple, white, adhesive label was on it, with 3 letters in his sharp, angular script, EGW, and beneath it, 2 words, if asked. I pulled it out. My laptop was in my carry-on, which was still downstairs, but I knew this needed to be handled with care. I sat at the desk. I looked at the drive. This was the key he had mentioned. I left the library, locking it behind me, and went to retrieve my bag. I returned, locked myself in again, and sat at the desk. I booted my secure laptop, which operated on a closed system. I plugged in the drive. A prompt appeared. Password, 6 characters. I leaned back. 6 characters. A word, a name. My mind raced. I typed ELEANOR. Too long. I typed EDENGA. Eden Grace. No, a 6-character word, from the mythology he had built. I typed SWALLOW, the pendant, the swallow. I hit enter. Access denied. I stared at the screen. Of course, the swallow was me. I was the one who flew away. What was he? What was the house? What was the family crest? The anchor. The thing that holds. The thing that secures. The thing that drowns. I typed ANCHOR. I hit enter. The drive unlocked. A single video file appeared on the screen. The file name was just a string of numbers. A date. I looked at the file. I looked at the locked door. I thought of Silas's words. Don't trust any tests. I thought of the medical chaos upstairs. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this video was my primary asset. And you never show your primary asset until the final negotiation. This was not the time. I safely ejected the drive. I slipped it into my pocket. I packed the envelope, the original documents, into my own bag. I left the folders of my life in his cabinet. Let him think I had not found them. I was no longer just auditing a past crime. I was now in possession of evidence in an active, ongoing one. And the first rule of an audit is to secure your evidence. I walked to the door. My hand on the USB drive in my pocket. The game had changed. He had given me the past. I was going to use it to control the present. I walked back down the grand staircase, the heavy wax-sealed envelope in my bag. The anchor drive a cold, hard weight in my pocket. The house seemed to have reset itself after the medical alarm. The silence was absolute, the air thick and still. Camden Doyle was waiting at the bottom, standing by the portrait of me, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a man bracing for an impact. He is stable, Doyle said, his voice a low, strained whisper. The medical team, they are proficient. They'd have to be, in this house, I replied, my eyes scanning the hall. Where is she? She? The they? The one he warned me about. Before Doyle could formulate an answer, the sound of light. Quick footsteps on the marble floor echoed from a side corridor. A woman appeared, and she was a profound, jarring contradiction to the Gothic gloom of Ashbourne House. She was in her late 40s, perhaps, poured into a sharply tailored dress of a stunning bright cobalt blue. Her blonde hair was flawless, a sculpted, expensive helmet. Her pearls were real, and her smile was a brilliant, high wattage, an utterly false display of white teeth. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine about hostile takeovers, not in a house of mourning. She glided toward us, her smile widening, her eyes, the same pale blue as Silas's, doing a rapid, dissecting scan of me. You must be Eden, she breathed. Her voice was smooth, practiced, a cascade of cultivated sympathy. My dear, this is all just... It's so much. I am so terribly glad you are finally here. She put a hand on my arm, a gesture of instant, unearned intimacy. Her nails were perfect. I did not move. Doyle, stiffening, made the reluctant introduction. Ms. Whitaker, this is May Ashbourne Vale, the Admiral's niece. Mrs. Vale is the managing director of the Ashbourne Family Foundation. The foundation, the money. May, please, she said, squeezing my arm before releasing it. We are family, after all, or, at least, we all hope so. This must be such a shock for you. It's a complex data set, Mrs. Vale, I said. Her smile faltered for a bare fraction of a second. Yes, well, Uncle Silas, he has these moments, his mind. It's not what it was, these flights of fancy. She glanced at Doyle, a shared, conspiratorial look he did not return. But, she continued, her tone shifting to one of bright, boardroom efficiency, we must be sure, mustn't we? For the sake of the estate, for clarity. There it was, the setup. I've taken the liberty, she said, as if offering me a cup of tea, of arranging a simple, conclusive DNA test for tomorrow morning, just a formality, a private lab, very discreet. They'll send a phlebotomist here, 10 a.m., just to get everything on the record and clear up any confusion, to make it all official. Silas's voice echoed in my head, a frantic whisper. Don't trust any tests, any of them. This was it. This was the they. May needed the test to fail. I gave her my best auditor's mask, neutral, compliant, slightly weary. Clarity is always the goal. Mrs. Vale, if it helps, I'm happy to cooperate. 10 a.m. is fine. Her relief was visible. The bright smile became genuine. Wonderful, wonderful. That's settled. I'll let you get some rest. Doyle, see that? Eden has a room, the Rose Room, perhaps? She turned and glided away, the click of her heels on the marble a sharp, retreating rhythm, leaving a trail of expensive, cloying perfume. I turned and walked to the tall, narrow window at the end of the hall. Pretending to look out at the dark, manicured lawn, I pulled out my secure work phone. My fingers flew, sending a text to a number I kept for emergencies. A former colleague at Northbridge, a man who lived in the digital shadows. Alex, need a favor. Priority 0. Trace, Project Chimera. I need a non-viable, tagged biological marker, synthetic protein signature, inert, but designed to trigger a reprocessing error if the sample is substituted or optimized. Courier package to this P.O. box by 0800 tomorrow. This is not a drill. Alex's reply was immediate. Chimera is hot. On its way. I put the phone away. I was not just going to swap a tube. I was going to plant a tracker in her system. Doyle had moved to my side, his shoulder nearly touching mine. He was looking at May's retreating form. She is the one, I said. He nodded, his face gray. He lowered his voice. though we were entirely alone. Ms. Whitaker, you need to know, 30 days ago, the Admiral had a bad night, a fib. He was not lucid, or so we thought. What happened? May brought in her own notary and her own lawyers, Kingsley and Marsh. And? She claims he signed a codicil to the will, a supplement. Doyle looked physically ill. I've been his lawyer for 20 years. Ms. Whitaker, I was not informed. I was not present. When I asked the Admiral about it, he claimed to have no memory of the meeting. What does the codicil say? Doyle met my eyes, his own filled with a mix of fear and anger. It states that if, upon his death, no legally verifiable direct line heir is confirmed, the entire Ashbourne Foundation, its assets, and its governing board fall under the sole and permanent control of the acting manager, May. The trap was not for me, it was for the estate. I was just the variable she had to eliminate. Silas's warning was not paranoia. It was a desperate, last-minute attempt to arm me. May needed my DNA test to fail, to prove I was a fraud, and she was the one administering it. Doyle, I said, my voice cold. I need access to the Foundation's books, right now. May has the office locked. The servers. I don't care about the office. I need remote server access. As a potential primary beneficiary and interested party in a potential competency case, I am requesting full financial transparency, or would you prefer I call the State Attorney General's office and report suspected financial elder abuse and probate fraud? Doyle's face, which had been pale, now regained a spark of color. I had given him a legal weapon. The guest suite. It has a hard line. I'll get you a password. An hour later, I was in an opulent, cold guest room, my laptop plugged directly into the wall. The room smelled like potpourri and old silk. I was not interested. I was inside the Ashbourne Foundation's financials. It was messy. May was not a sophisticated thief, but a bold one. She was using the foundation as her personal bank, but it was all masked as philanthropy. I was looking for patterns, for anomalies. And then I found it, a massive recurring monthly payment. Harborlight Youth Haven, a shelter for at-risk teenagers. It seemed legitimate, but the payments were too large, too consistent, and I cross-referenced the dates. They spiked, every single time, 8 weeks before every local election, 6 weeks before every state primary. This was not charity. This was a political slush fund. I pulled out the burner phone I had brought, the one I'd left in the rental car and retrieved. I activated a voice masking app and dialed the number for the Harborlight Youth Haven. A tired, reedy voice answered. Harborlight. I pitched my masked voice to a neutral, bureaucratic alto. Good evening. I'm calling from the Nonprofit Oversight Board, just conducting a routine audit of our grant recipients. I need to verify your per-head service fee. Oh, okay. It's late. This will be quick. Our records show your foundation partner, Ashbourne, is booking your services at 3 times the state average. We show a per-head fee of just under $3,000. There was a bitter laugh on the other end. 3,000? Ma'am, I wish. No. The Ashbourne grant pays our state-filed rate, $950 per child. And we're grateful for it, but it barely keeps the lights on. My blood ran cold. The books were showing payments of nearly $3,000. The Haven was receiving $950. The difference, over $2,000 per head, per month, was vanishing. It was being laundered through the foundation, skimmed by May, and, I suspected, funneled directly into her Vale Civic Strategies shell company, and from there, to the politicians she was buying. I was sitting in the dark, the green glow of the ledger on my face, when the monitor I'd set up on the house security feed blinked. Movement, at the front gate. It was past midnight. A white, unmarked panel truck was pulling up the long drive. It did not go to the service entrance. It came directly to the front door. I was moving before my brain had finished processing. I grabbed my auditor's kit, the small bag with my UV light and other tools. I was down the stairs in seconds, in my stocking feet, silent on the thick runners. I reached the grand hall just as the front doors were being opened. May was there, in a silk robe and slippers, her face a mask of anxious irritation. Two men in dark overalls were wheeling in dollies stacked high with bankers' boxes. "Quietly," May hissed at them. "To the archives in the East Wing. They are marked for storage." "Storage?" I said, stepping out from the shadow of the grand staircase. "Or shredding?" May froze. Her body went rigid. The men stopped, confused. "This is a private, family matter," May snapped, recovering, pulling her robe tighter. "I'm family," I said, walking toward the boxes. The labels were simple. K&M, Storage, Vale Civic. "These are old Foundation documents," May said, stepping between me and the dolly. "You have no right." "I have every right," I said, my voice flat. "Silas is incapacitated. As a potential beneficiary, I am ensuring the preservation of the estate. Open the box." May laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I will not." I ignored her. I looked at the two delivery men. "You are now material witnesses to a potential spoliation of evidence in a probate case. You can leave now, and I will forget your faces. Or you can stay, and you will be deposed." They looked at May, who was speechless with rage. They looked at me, cold and certain. They dropped the handles of their dollies and walked out the front door, leaving it open. I did not wait. I pulled the small blade from my kit and slit the packing tape on the top box. I flipped the lid. My heart stopped. They were not financial records. They were legal files, adoption papers, thick stacks of them. I pulled the top file. In the matter of the adoption of E.W., the name was blurred. The initials Stark. I pulled another. Legalization of ward status, E.W., a third. State petition for relinquishment. It was me. It was the entire paper trail of my manufactured orphan status. "This is just archiving," May stammered, her voice losing its edge. I was not listening. I was looking at the side of the box, an ink stamp, invisible in the dim light. I pulled the pocket UV light from my kit and clicked it on. The fluorescent blue glow was immediate. Stark in the dark hall. A stamp. Kingsley and Marsh. "Doyle mentioned you use Kingsley and Marsh," I said, not looking at her. "Your personal lawyers." I looked up. Her face was no longer angry. It was the cold, flat, dead face of a person who had been caught. "These aren't Foundation archives. May," I said, my voice a whisper. "These are my archives. This is the paperwork that buried me. You weren't cleaning house. You were destroying the evidence of the original crime. Your crime." I turned and walked to the house intercom on the wall. I pressed the button for Doyle's room. "Doyle, get down to the entrance hall, now, and bring your phone." When he arrived seconds later, looking panicked, he saw the scene. Me, May, and the stacks of boxes that held my entire past. "Doyle," I commanded, "get a judge on the phone, now. I want a temporary injunction. We are sealing this room and these documents. Cite preservation of the estate pending a competency hearing and spoliation of evidence. I want a full chain of custody, effective immediately." Doyle, seeing the boxes, the K&M stamp, and May's face, suddenly looked 10 feet tall. He pulled out his phone. "I'll call Judge Miller. He owes the Admiral. He'll sign it tonight." "You can't do this," May shrieked. "I just did," I said. While Doyle was on the phone, his voice a low, authoritative thunder, I noticed May's personal study, the one she kept locked, was ajar. She must have been in there when the truck arrived. I slipped inside. It was a small, modern office. A high-end multifunction printer sat on the credenza. I walked over to it. These machines store data. They have hard drives. But more importantly, they have memory card slots. I popped the cover. An SD card was seated in the slot. I pulled my laptop and a small forensic data copier from my bag. I didn't have time to hack the drive, but I could clone the card. I plugged it in. The data transfer began. It was everything she had printed, scanned, or copied for the last month. The codicil, the letters from K&M, the real financials. 90 seconds, the clone was complete. I slipped the original card back into the printer. I pocketed my drive. I walked back into the hall. Doyle was off the phone. The order is signed. The judge is emailing it now. No one touches these boxes without a court order. May stared at me. Her mask of civility was gone. Her face was pure, unadulterated hatred. I walked past her, toward the stairs. Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day, Mrs. Vale, I said. I went up to my room, the cloned SD card in my pocket, right next to the anchor drive. The DNA game was set for 10 a.m. I was ready. I slept for exactly 2 hours. It was not sleep, but a tactical shutdown. At 6 a.m., I was in the hotel-like bathroom of the Rose Room, analyzing the Chimera packet that Alex's courier had successfully delivered to the local post office box at 5:30 a.m. It had cost me a significant favor. The kit was ingenious. It contained 2 items. The first was a standard, sealed blood draw vial, identical to the ones a lab would use. It was filled with inert, synthetic blood, indistinguishable to the eye. The second was a small, gel-coated swab. The gel contained the tagged protein marker. My plan was simple. I would use their kit, but I would provide my sample. At 9:50 a.m., a young, nervous phlebotomist was shown into the library, where I was waiting. May was not present. She was sending a proxy, a low-level, deniable employee. Smart. "Ms. Whitaker?" the phlebotomist asked. She set down her sealed, private lab-branded kit. "Yes, thank you for coming." I watched her unpack sterile wipes, needle, and 2 purple-topped collection tubes, pre-labeled with a barcode. "This will just take a moment," she said, her hands slightly unsteady. She was new, perfect. As she turned to prep the sterile field on the table, I accidentally knocked my glass of water over, soaking a stack of coasters, just inches from her kit. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, jumping up, genuinely mortified. Or so I appeared. "No problem," she squeaked, moving her supplies. In that brief, 2-second window of distraction, my hands moved. I did not swap her tubes for mine. That was too crude. Instead, as I helped her move her items, I took the gel-coated swab from my pocket and, in the same motion, wiped the inside of her 2 collection tubes. The gel, invisible and inert, transferred instantly. Then, I did something she didn't expect. I picked up one of her pre-labeled tubes. "You know," I said, "I'm a bit of a control freak. My colleague, Mr. Doyle, is arranging a second, independent test, just for the estate's records. Auditing 101. Always get a second opinion. Would you mind doing a third draw for me?" I produced my own, identical purple-top tube, the one from Alex's kit. I had already put a matching fake barcode label on it. She looked confused. "A third tube? It's not on my order." "I know, but you're already here. It would be such a help, for the lawyers." Unwilling to argue, she sighed. "I guess so." She performed the draw. The first tube, she filled. The second tube, she filled. Both were now infected with my chimera marker. Then she filled my tube, the one with the synthetic blood. She capped them, placed them in the biohazard bag, and sealed the box. "Thank you," I said, walking her to the door. "You have no idea how helpful you've been." She left. May's lab now had 2 samples of my real, tainted blood, and I had 1 sample of my blood, which was a fake, headed to a different lab entirely. I texted Doyle, "Send the courier for the package. University lab, top priority." The results from May's lab came back within speed that was, in itself, an admission of guilt. At 2 p.m., less than 4 hours after the draw, an email landed in my inbox. It was from May, and she had, as I'd anticipated, CC'd the entire board of the Ashbourne Foundation, Camden Doyle, and 3 lawyers from Kingsley and Marsh. Subject: a sad clarification. my dearest board members, and all interested parties. As you know, we were visited by a young woman, Ms. Eden Whitaker, who has made a significant claim upon the Ashbourne estate. In the interest of clarity and due diligence, we had a fully accredited, independent DNA test performed this morning. The results have just come in. With a heavy heart, I must inform you that the test has conclusively denied any biological relationship between Ms. Whitaker and the Ashbourne line. This is, of course, a sad and confusing time. We wish Ms. Whitaker the best, but the Foundation's legal duty is clear. The codicil regarding succession is now, unfortunately, the operative document. Sincerely, May Ashbourne Vale. It was a masterpiece of corporate assassination. In one email, she had declared me a fraud, cemented her control of the Foundation, and insulated herself with a conclusive scientific report. I waited 1 hour. I let the board members stew. I let the lawyers at K&M begin to draft their motions. Then, at 3 p.m., I forwarded her email to the same group. Subject: a sad clarification and an important correction. Dear board members, Mrs. Vale. I, too, am committed to clarity, which is why, as any good auditor knows, you must always verify your data. May, you are correct that a DNA test was performed this morning, but you seem to be working from the wrong one. Attached, please find the certified, notarized results from the University of Maryland Medical Center's Genomic Lab, a test arranged by Mr. Camden Doyle. This test was performed on a sample from the same blood draw this morning. As you can see, it confirms a 99.97% probability of a grandparent-granddaughter relationship, a conclusive match. Which, of course, raises a fascinating question. Why did your lab get such a different result? Sincerely, Eden G. Whitaker. I attached the PDF of the university lab's report. The response was instantaneous. My phone buzzed. It was Doyle. I didn't answer. Then, May. I didn't answer. Then, an email from May. This time only to me. What is this? This is illegal. This is slander. I replied, again to the full board. May, I'm so glad you asked. I was also confused by the discrepancy, so I had my former colleagues at Northbridge Compliance, the digital forensics unit, analyze the chain of custody data from your private lab. The metadata on their results file is very telling. It appears your lab optimized the sample. They found my blood, but they also found an inert, tagged protein marker that I added to the vial, a chimera marker, we call it. It's designed to be invisible, unless a lab tries to tamper with or substitute a sample. When they cleaned the sample to produce their predetermined result, they triggered a cascade error in the protein tag. Attached, please find the report from Northbridge confirming your lab committed felonious evidence tampering. I've already forwarded this to the State Attorney General. I hit send. The door to the library slammed open. May stood there, her face a mask of purple, volcanic rage. Her blonde hair was, for the first time, not perfect. A strand had fallen loose. You, she hissed. You little bitch. I did not look up from my laptop. That's a subjective assessment. Mrs. Vale, what I am, objectively, is the person who just proved you committed fraud. I'd be careful what you say next. I will destroy you, she spat, taking a step into the room. You have no idea what you've done. There is an ethics clause in that will. You will be disinherited for this attack. You will be thrown out of this house with nothing. Oh, I said. Finally looking up, I smiled, a cold, thin expression. Thank you for that. I tapped my phone, which had been on the desk. Screen dark, it had been recording. I was worried I wouldn't have a record of you threatening a legal beneficiary, I said. Now I do. And by the way, the house security cameras in the hall, the ones you had installed, they're audio-enabled, too. Her blood drained. The rage was replaced by a cold, reptilian panic. The codicil, I said, is void. It was predicated on no legal heir. I am the legal heir. Your own fraudulent test just proved you knew it and tried to hide it. The Admiral. He was senile, she stammered, falling back on her last defense. All of this, it's a fantasy. You're a claimant, just a grifter. He wasn't senile, I said. I stood up. He was a coward, but he was a meticulous coward. I walked over to her, holding up the letter Silas had written in 2016, the one I'd found in the envelope. He wrote this years ago, I said, when his mind was sharp. If Khan comes to this house, that's me. The house will certify. He didn't just mean the documents, he meant the house itself. I walked past her, leaving her frozen in the middle of the room. I was buzzing, the pieces all clicking into place, the acrostic, the birth certificate. It wasn't about the cabinet, it was about the name. I went back to the birth certificate, which I'd laid on the desk, the field names. Attending Physician Nurse County Hospital Office of Records Registrar. ANCHOR. It was the password to the USB, and it was the key to the house. I walked to the main shelving wall of the library. It was organized by subject. I found the A section, Art History. I pulled the A volume. I went to N, Naval History. C, Classics. H, Hellenic Studies. O, Oceanography. R, Roman Law. I found the 6 specific books, all bound in identical red leather. I pushed the A book, a faint click. I pushed N, a deeper thunk. C, H, O, R. On the final push, there was a loud, hydraulic sigh. The entire 20-foot section of bookcase, the one dedicated to Roman law, swung silently inward, revealing a dark 4-by-4-foot opening, a walk-in vault. May let out a small, terrified gasp from the doorway. I stepped inside. It was a small room, a single light bulb overhead. Against the back wall was a large, black, military-grade safe, and next to it, on a simple wooden shelf, was a logbook, a simple, black, state courthouse logbook. I opened it. It was a record, in Silas's sharp, angular hand, of every intervention. March 1991. Dr. Robertson, $10,000, for cooperation on birth certificate. April 1991. Judge Miller, $50,000, to expedite orphan processing. May 1991. State clerk. And then, I saw it. The signature. Not Silas's. A signature on a series of documents from 1998, certifying my permanent, unreversible orphan status. The status that sealed the file, even from me. As Silas had written, the signature was clear. Gerard T. Kingsley, of Kingsley and Marsh, May's lawyer. And on the line below, a co-signature, a state official from the Office of Child Services, a name I recognized from the financial files, a man who was now the chief advisor for May's Vale Civic Strategies. May had not just been protecting an inheritance, she had been protecting her co-conspirators. She had been the one who took Silas's security measure and made it a permanent, legal, and profitable prison. I pulled out my phone. I began taking pictures. Page after page after page. "You've lost," I said, my voice echoing from inside the vault. I hit upload on the encrypted cloud backup. It's over. The library was no longer a sanctuary of books. It had been converted into a courtroom. The air was thick with the same cloying, antiseptic smell from upstairs, a sign that the master of the house was now presiding over this hearing from his sickbed. His presence piped in via a baby monitor placed on the desk, which broadcast the rhythmic, agonizing hiss-click pause of the ventilator. Silas was fading. The medical crisis had passed, but the cost had been catastrophic. Doyle had informed me, semi-lucid, but his body was in the final stages of surrender, and yet, this morning, he had issued one final, non-negotiable order, scrawled on a notepad. Read it, now. So, we were assembled. It was a tribunal of the damned. I stood by the fireplace, my back to the cold marble. Camden Doyle sat at the head of the massive mahogany desk, his face a grim judicial mask. He had transformed from a conflicted legal advisor into an instrument of the estate's true will. Across from him sat May Ashbourne Vale. She was no longer the vibrant, cobalt blue hostess. She was dressed in a severe black suit, her face pale and pinched. Beside her sat her lawyer, Gerard Kingsley, the man whose name I had seen in Silas's secret logbook. He was a slick, silver-haired man who looked at everyone in the room as if they were beneath his contempt. And in the corner sat two crucial, silent figures. The first was Mr. Abernathy, a small, terrified, bird-like man who was the notary public for the county, the one who had allegedly overseen all of Silas's legal documents. The second, sitting beside him, was Dr. Lena Jacoby, a woman I had retained last night with a single, urgent call. She was the foremost forensic handwriting expert in the state. I had paid her an exorbitant 5-figure fee for 2 hours of her time. "We are gathered," Doyle began, his voice resonating in the quiet room, "at the request of Admiral Silas Ashbourne, to perform an expedited, provisional reading of his final will and testament, given the extraordinary circumstances and claims upon the estate." "We object," Kingsley said immediately, his voice smooth. "This is highly irregular. My client, Mrs. Vale, is the acting fiduciary of the estate. The Admiral is not of sound mind. This proceeding is coercive." "The Admiral's lucidity is not for you to determine, Counselor," Doyle said, his voice dropping an octave. "But since you have brought it up, let us move to the most recent addition. Mrs. Vale, you have presented a codicil, a supplement to the will, signed 30 days ago. Is that correct?" "That is correct," May said, her voice regaining a fraction of its former confidence. "Uncle Silas signed it in the presence of Mr. Abernathy here. It clarifies his wishes regarding the foundation." She slid a single vellum document across the desk. Doyle did not touch it. He looked at Mr. Abernathy. The notary public was sweating, his eyes darting between May and her lawyer. "Mr. Abernathy," Doyle said, "you will attest, on the record, that you witnessed the Admiral sign this document?" Abernathy licked his lips. Yes, it was all in order. He signed it." Doyle nodded slowly. "I see. Then we have a problem, because I have here." He produced a stack of letters from his own files. 4 decades of the Admiral's signature, and Dr. Jacoby? Dr. Jacoby, who had been given the codicil to examine an hour ago, stood up. She placed 2 large, illuminated photographs on an easel. One was Silas's signature from a 2010 land trust. The other was the signature from May's codicil. "They are different," Dr. Jacoby said, her voice the flat, certain tone of an academic. "The overall form is an excellent forgery, the T crossing, the slant, the baseline, all very well mimicked." "I object to the term forgery," Kingsley snapped. "But," Dr. Jacoby continued, ignoring him, "the forger made a common mistake. They focused on the form, not the function. Silas Ashbourne writes with a heavy, steady, naval-trained hand. The pressure is consistent. The G in Ashbourne. He loops it. But the tail is rounded." She used a laser pointer to circle the letter on the 2010 signature. Now look at the codicil." The pointer moved. "The signature is lighter, the stroke less certain, consistent with an elderly hand, a good touch. But look at the G, and the Y in 30, and the G in August. In all 3 instances, the downward tail, the descender, is not rounded. It's sharp. It's a V shape, a tick. It's a mark of haste." She turned to the room. "This is not the signature of a man who is frail. This is the signature of a person imitating a frail hand. The person who signed this document was not Silas Ashbourne." The room was absolutely silent, save for the hiss-click pause from the monitor. Kingsley sputtered. This is speculation. The man is over 80. He's..." May broke. Her carefully constructed dam of lies gave way. "It was his assistant," she blurted out, her voice a high, ugly shriek. He had a tremor that day. He authorized his assistant to steady his hand. That's all it was." Kingsley closed his eyes, his face a mask of agony. May had just admitted it. Mr. Abernathy, the notary, went a shade of gray I had not thought humanly possible. He sank back into his chair, looking at his hands. He had just participated in a felony. "Thank you, May," I said quietly from the fireplace. "That's very clear." "It doesn't matter," May shot back, her eyes wild. The codicil is secondary. The primary document, the will, it has a morals clause, an ethics clause. And you," she pointed a finger at me, "with your attacks, your fraud, your fabricated DNA, you have violated it. You are disinherited. I am still the only qualified manager. You have no standing." "Standing?" I said. "That's an interesting word." I walked to the desk, my laptop in hand. I placed it in the center. "You're right, May, the DNA was a mess. It was your word against mine, his lab against mine. It's confusing for the board. It's all just claims." I looked at the assembled lawyers, which is why Silas left a different kind of witness. He was a paranoid, controlling, meticulous man. He knew this day would come. I plugged the USB drive into the laptop, the drive labeled Anchor. "He warned me about you, May, not with a whisper, with a contingency plan." I hit play. The video filled the screen. It was not the hollowed-out ruin from the room upstairs. It was Silas. Years ago. He was in a hospital bed, but he was robust, his eyes sharp, his face fuller. He looked powerful, even with an IV in his arm. The date stamp on the video was from 2016, just after a major heart surgery. He was looking directly into the camera. He was reading from a prepared statement. "This is Admiral Silas Ashbourne." His voice, strong and clear, boomed from the laptop speakers. "I am of sound mind and body, though temporarily he grimaced. Inconvenienced, I am making this recording, to be held by my counsel, in the event of my incapacitation or death." He looked, I realized, not at the camera, but at me. "A claim will be made on my estate," he said, "by my granddaughter, Eden Grace. She is my granddaughter. I am stating this for the record. She is my blood. But there are vipers in my own house. They will move to block her. They will use money. They will use lawyers. And if they are desperate, they will use science." May had stopped breathing. Silas on the video leaned closer. "They will bring up DNA. They will try to use it to deny her, to prove she is not who she is. It will be their final, most convincing lie." He lifted a hand. "When they do, when they bring the DNA, do not trust the paper. Do not trust the test. Find the code. The proof is in the locket." The video ended. There was a profound, echoing silence, broken only by the ventilator. "The locket?" Doyle asked, his voice rough. I reached up to my neck. I unclasped the silver chain, the swallow pendant. The only thing I had from my childhood. I had thought it was just a trinket. I laid it on the desk. "I didn't understand it either," I said, "until I heard code." I took the pendant. I turned it over. There was a tiny, almost invisible seam. My fingernail found the catch. I'd worn it for 34 years and never known it opened. It popped open. Inside there was nothing, just 2 hollow pieces of silver. "This is a joke," May sneered. "A child's toy." "No," I said. I looked closer. In the bottom half, there was a pinprick, a tiny dark dot that was not part of the metal. "Dr. Jacoby," I said, "you have a magnifying glass." She produced a jeweler's loupe. I held the locket. She angled the loupe. "My God," she whispered. "It's a microdot." "Naval intelligence," I said, looking at Doyle. "His specialty." Doyle was already moving. He went to a drawer in the desk. He pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a high-powered desk loop, a reader. He placed the locket under the light. He angled the lens. He was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then he straightened up. "It's the original will," he said, his voice shaking. "Photographed. The entire document, on the day of signing, dated June 10th, 2016, the same day as that video." He looked at Mr. Abernathy. "The watermark. It's a micro-printed serial number. Does it match your logbook for that date?" Abernathy, trembling, fumbled with his briefcase, produced his bound notary log. He flipped the pages. He stared. It matches," he whispered. "It matches. Every indentation, every flaw in the paper. It is the original." Doyle turned to the room. "And this will, the real will. It contains no morals clause, no ethics violation. It contains," he read from the micro-image, "a single simple bequest, all my personal assets, and sole, irrevocable veto power over the Ashbourne Foundation Board are left to my granddaughter, Eden Grace Whitaker." May Ashbourne Vale made a sound, a low, guttural noise of pure negation. I demand," she stammered, looking at Kingsley. "Lawyer, I need time. My lawyer." Kingsley stood, his own face ashen. "This proceeding is irregular. We contest everything. We will be filing. We demand all documents be sealed." "Oh, they will be sealed. Counselor," Doyle said, his voice like ice. "Along with a copy of this hearing, which will be turned over to the district attorney's office, with a recommendation to investigate you, Mr. Abernathy, and Mrs. Vale for conspiracy to commit probate fraud." May looked at me. Her face was a ruin. It was over. But I wasn't done. "You're right, Mr. Kingsley. The legalities are complex," I said. "But the money is simple." I turned my laptop to the room, to the notary, to Doyle. I opened the file I had copied from May's printer, the real financials. "May didn't just want the foundation to continue her charity," I said. "She needed it to cover her crimes. This is a list." I projected it onto the wall. "Of the Ashbourne scholars for the last 3 years, 50 names, 50 full scholarships, very impressive." I clicked, a new list appeared beside it. "And this is a list of known, documented bot accounts used for Mays Vale Civic Strategies grassroots online donation campaigns. The names, they're identical. Mary Smith of Ohio, who received a $50,000 scholarship, is also Mary S., who donated $50,000 to May's Political Action Committee." I hit the key again, the spreadsheet from the Harbor Light Youth Haven. She was not just laundering money to politicians. She was laundering it from the foundation, through at-risk children, and back to herself, claiming it as donations to get a tax break on her own theft. The room was frozen. The only sound was the hiss-click-pause. The ventilator was a countdown, a death knell. May didn't say a word. She just sank into her chair. The intercom on Doyle's desk crackled. It was the nurse's voice, thin and urgent. "Mr. Doyle, the Admiral, he's asking, he wants everyone out, except her." The room emptied, Kingsley pulling a catatonic May, Doyle nodding at me, his face a complex mask of respect and sorrow, as he escorted the notary and the expert out. I was alone in the library, the smell of old books, fraud, and victory thick in the air. The ventilator sound from the monitor was the only sound. Hiss, click, pause. I walked up the grand staircase. I walked down the dark, antiseptic hall. I pushed open the door to his room. He was awake. His eyes were open. The daggers were gone, replaced by a deep, watery exhaustion. I stood at the foot of his bed. He looked at me, the victor, the auditor, the heir. He raised one, trembling hand, not to me, but to the room, to the house. "I fought," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. My whole life, on the open sea, against enemies, I won. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the shame he had hidden. But I lost, he breathed. Here, in my own house. I walked back into the room of the dying. The adrenaline from the legal confrontation in the library had evaporated, leaving behind the cold, metallic silence of the sick room. The hiss, click, and pause of the ventilator was the only metronome. Silas had watched me, via the monitor, dismantle his family's corruption. He had seen me win. Now, he wanted the final confession. I stood at the foot of his bed, the same position I had taken as an accuser just the day before. Now, I was the sole inheritor of the wreckage. His voice, when it came, was a dry rustle of paper. He had no energy left for command, only for truth. 1998, he whispered. I waited. I was an auditor, and this was the final, critical piece of testimony. A rescue operation off the Horn of Africa. His eyes were fixed on the canopy above his bed, but he was seeing a dark sea, 30 years ago. It was a failure. We went in too hard, with bad intelligence. We lost 3 men. He swallowed, the action visibly painful. We captured the syndicate leader's brother. A mistake. The leader. He sent a message, not to the Navy, to me, personally, at this house. They knew where I lived. They knew about Eleanor. His gaze shifted, finding mine. The old, sharp intensity was still there, a dying ember in the ash. The message said, "An admiral pays his debts with the blood of his kin." He paused, letting the words hang in the antiseptic air. "He meant your mother. He meant you." "And so," I said, my voice flat, "you built a wall." "Eleanor," he breathed, and for the first time, his voice cracked, a fissure in the granite. "Your mother, she fought me. She called me a tyrant. She wanted to run, take you to Argentina. I called her foolish, sentimental. I told her I had a better way. The secure path," I said. It was not a question. "Naval intelligence, private contractors, they owed me. They could make you a ghost. They could bury you in the system, wrap you in bureaucratic tape, until the threat was neutralized. A phantom." "And my mother?" His eyes closed. The green line on the monitor tracking his heart rate stuttered. "She told me I was burying you alive, that it was a sin. She packed a bag. She said she was taking you to a friend in Virginia. That night, she took the Jaguar." He opened his eyes. They were not just tired, they were haunted. "The state police report said it was ice on the bridge, a tractor trailer. She lost control. She was dead before they pulled her from the wreckage." He paused. "You were not in the car. She had left you here, with a sitter, while she went to argue with me one last time." The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than stone. "So she died," I said, the words tasting like acid. "Fighting your plan, and the first thing you did was execute it anyway." "She was gone," he whispered. A sudden, shocking flare of the old, angry admiral. "The threat was real. You were all I had left. I signed the papers. I told myself it was to keep you always safe." The words, "on the photograph," but I was lying. It wasn't security. It was penance. My arrogance had killed her. And so I sacrificed you, my granddaughter, to my own pride. I processed this, the cold, hard fact of it. He had not lost me. He had used me. I was a living monument to his guilt. "But you stopped," I said, pushing the data. "The threat was neutralized. The surveillance files you kept. There's a gap, 18 months. You stopped watching. Why not reverse it? Why not find me?" He turned his head, that familiar, cowardly evasion, toward the curtained window. "Because," he whispered, "the machine I built, it was too perfect. By the time the threat was gone, May and Kingsley, they were in control of it. When I made inquiries, When I suggested it was time to find you, they showed me the legal blocks they had put in place, the permanent seals. They told me it would expose us all, that I would go to prison for the original fraud, for creating a phantom, and you were a coward, I finished for him. I was a coward, he admitted. I couldn't get you back, so I tried to buy my way out. The foundation. I poured millions into it. All for at-risk children. It was for you. Atonement. But I couldn't bear to look at it. I couldn't run it. It was the face of my failure. So I gave the operation of it to May, and she corrupted it. She saw it as a bank, not a penance. I listened. The story was complete. It was sordid, human, and pathetic. I felt a distinct, chilling absence of rage. There was no catharsis. Yelling at him would be a waste of oxygen. He was not a monster. He was a weak, powerful man, a far more common and dangerous thing. I am not here to give you absolution. Silas, I said. The first time I had used his name, it felt like gravel in my mouth. You want forgiveness. You will have to find it somewhere else. I am here for justice. Justice, he rasped, a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval. Good. He fumbled with a small, black remote I had not seen. It was not for the nurse, a panel beneath his nightstand, designed to look like a decorative carving, slid open with a faint, pneumatic hiss. His hand, mottled and trembling, disappeared inside. He pulled out a single, heavy, dark metal key. It was not a house key. It was a vault key. The safe, he said, his voice a thread. In the library, the one you opened, the logbook. That was just the ledger. This opens the box. He held the key out to me. The effort was immense, his arm shaking. May and Kingsley, they thought they were running Bayshore. They were amateurs, using my scraps. In that safe is the real ledger, the one I kept on. Everyone, the judges who signed your papers, the senators who took my donations, the developers who built this town on my intelligence. It's all there. Enough to burn the entire corrupt machine to the ground. His eyes held mine. If you dare. I looked at the key. It was my inheritance, the key to my revenge, the key to my past. I did not take it, not yet. There was one last data point to reconcile. The gap, I said. His eyes clouded. What? The gap in your surveillance files, the 18 months, between age 25 and age 27, your files on me, they just stop. I don't recall. I do, I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a scalpel. I was 26. I was at Northbridge. I was working a trafficking case, trying to get my certifications. I worked for 3 days straight. I collapsed at my desk. Malnutrition, severe exhaustion. I was in Bayshore General Hospital for 2 weeks. They thought I was an addict. No ID, no insurance card. I had no one, no family to call. I let the silence hang, broken only by the hiss, click, and pause of his breathing. Your files on me start again the day I was discharged. So I know you knew. I know you were watching. My question, Silas, is, were you there? When I was in that hospital, alone, convinced I was going to die in a state-run bed? He did not look away. He had no evasions left. The truth was the only currency he had. He let out a single, shuddering, broken breath. I was there, he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Every day, I sat, in the parking lot, in my car. I watched the door to the emergency room. I watched the window of your room. You never came in, I stated. I couldn't. His face, the face of the Admiral, crumpled. I was a coward. He had said it. The word that defined him, the word that had defined my entire life. I looked at this shell of a man, this architect of my orphanhood, who was too frightened to even visit his own creation. The rage I had stored for 34 years, the white-hot anger I had expected to feel, it just wasn't there. It was Gone. It was pointless. It was a waste of energy. He was just a man, a failed, terrified, dying man. My anger was not for him. My anger was for the system he had built. I stepped forward, closing the last 3 feet that had always been between us. I put my hand, my warm, living, 34-year-old hand, on the crisp, white sheet of his bed. Not on him. I could not touch him, but on the bed. It was the closest I had ever come to him. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet. "You were, but you're just one man. You're just the signature. The first signature." I finally decisively took the heavy, cold key from his hand. "My anger. It's not for you. You're irrelevant. My anger is for the machine, the judges, the lawyers, the clerks, the loopholes that let a child be erased. I am not going to waste my time on you." I turned, the key heavy in my palm. "I am going to spend my time dismantling the machine that let you do it." His eyes held mine. He saw the auditor. He saw the truth of the verdict. He nodded, a single, weak, final gesture. He accepted the sentence. He accepted whatever I was about to do to his name, his legacy, his town. I walked out of the room. I did not look back. I walked down the grand staircase, the sound of the ventilator fading behind me until it was gone. I had my inheritance, a name, a fortune, and a kill list. My strategy was set. Attack the money, attack the signatures, attack the public light. The audit of Ashbourne House was complete. The audit of Bayshore was about to begin. The moment I left Silas's room, the key heavy in my hand, the audit was over, and the war began. The next 48 hours were a blur of coordinated, strategic assaults. There was no time for grief, no space for emotion. There was only the plan. Camden Doyle, galvanized by the microdot will and the decades of his own suppressed doubts, became a legal force of nature. At 7 a.m., we were on the courthouse steps, filing an emergency injunction to freeze the Ashbourne Foundation's assets, remove May Ashbourne Vale as manager, and appoint a temporary neutral trustee. Our petition was not a request. It was an avalanche of evidence. Exhibit A, the notarized, certified report from the University of Maryland Genomic Lab, confirming my DNA with 99.97% certainty. Exhibit B, the damning forensic report from Northbridge Compliance, proving May's lab had received a sample contaminated with the chimera protein tag and had subsequently tampered with it to produce a false negative. Exhibit C, Dr. Jacoby's sworn affidavit and forensic analysis, identifying the codicil signature as a forgery. Exhibit D, the high-resolution photographic scan of the microdot, will from my locket, authenticated by Mr. Abernathy's own logbook, which Doyle had secured. Exhibit E, the preliminary financial audit, showing the Harbor Light discrepancy and the bot scholarship loop. The judge, the same Judge Miller who had expedited my orphan status 30 years prior, was now staring at a motion that proved his own past complicity. He had no choice. He recused himself, but not before stamping the temporary injunction. The foundation was frozen. May was out. But a court order was only a legal maneuver. I was fighting a machine, and a machine must be dismantled publicly. While Doyle was in court, I was in the library, initiating Phase 2, the information war. I used my secure, anonymous laptop, the one I had brought from Northbridge. I drafted a single, concise, anonymous tip. I sent it to the one investigative reporter at the Bayshore Beacon who had a reputation for bulldog-like tenacity and a hatred for the local political establishment. The subject line was simple: where do the Ashbourne Foundation's shadows fall? The body was just questions. Ask May Ashbourne Vale why the Harbor Light Youth Haven is billed at 3 times the state rate. Ask her why her Vale Civic Strategies PAC seems to get a donation spike every time Harbor Light gets a check. Ask her what Judge Miller and the state clerk's office owe her. I hit send. The seed was planted. Phase 3 was for the professionals. I contacted my federal colleague, the one who worked in financial crimes. I didn't give him my name. I used a voice-masked call and a secure data drop. "I'm an auditor," I said. "I've got a locked room scenario for you, a nonprofit, a political PAC, and a series of city contracts that all seem to be approved by the same council members. The foundation's donations perfectly map to the PAC's expenditures, which perfectly map to the city council's votes on zoning contracts. It's a closed loop." I sent him the data from May's printer and the logs from Silas's vault. He was silent for a full minute. "This isn't a locked room," he finally said. "This is an entire corrupt ecosystem. Who is this?" "Just a ghost in the machine," I said, and hung up. I knew that the federal interest would put a pressure on the state district attorney that no local lawyer could. That afternoon, Doyle and I met with the real director of the Harbor Light Youth Haven, the tired-voiced man I had spoken to on the phone. We met in a sterile diner 20 miles outside of Bayshore. His name was Mr. Evans. He was a good man, drowning in paperwork and debt. Doyle laid out the financials. "Mr. Evans, the Ashbourne Foundation has been billing the estate, and thus the IRS, for a service fee of nearly $3,000 per child at your facility. You are receiving $950. Evans stared at the numbers, his face turning from confusion to a deep, profound, righteous anger. They're stealing in the names of my kids," he whispered. That's $2,000 per child. We could have a new roof. We could have a social worker. We would like you to make a formal recorded statement to that effect," I said. He did. The counterattack came, as I knew it would. May, though legally frozen, was not silent. She was a cornered animal. She launched her own media campaign. It was an online blitz, sponsored posts, dark Facebook ads, and a series of anonymous blog posts. The narrative was vicious and effective. Grifter, liar, and prostitute, the lost heir of Ashbourne House. They claimed I was a Northbridge auditor who had been fired for erratic behavior. They had dug up my hospitalization for exhaustion and reframed it as a psychotic break and a drug overdose. They claimed I was a gold digger who had seduced the senile Camden Doyle into perpetrating a massive fraud against a grieving family. They even, disgustingly, had a source who claimed I had offered to trade favors for the DNA test. It was a classic smear, designed to paint me as an unstable, unethical, and sexually compromised woman. It was designed to destroy my credibility as an auditor. I read it all. I felt the ice in my veins. This was not a fight about money. It was a fight for my very identity. May wanted to play in the mud. I was about to set the mud on fire. I did not respond with a press release. I did not respond with a denial. I responded with data. I created a simple, public-facing website, the Ashbourne Foundation Audit, a preliminary report, and on it, I released a single, sanitized, but utterly damning file. The list of the 50 Ashbourne scholars laid out in a clean 2-column spreadsheet. Column A, scholarship recipient name. Column B, known political bot account, Vale Civic donor name. The match was 1-to-1. I added no commentary. I made no accusations. I just posted the ledger. The blog posts about my drug overdose vanished within an hour, replaced by a stunned, deafening silence from May's camp. The system finally began to move. The court reviewed our filing and May's now public, self-incriminating data. The injunction was made permanent. Pending a full criminal investigation, a neutral, the court-appointed trustee was put in charge of the foundation. May was legally barred from the building, and then, the big one, the state attorney general's office, no doubt feeling the heat from their federal counterparts, issued 2 subpoenas, one for May Ashbourne Vale, one for Gerard T. Kingsley, and one for the state clerk whose name was in Silas's logbook. The machine was beginning to eat itself. But I was not finished. A court case would take years. It would be a slow, grinding process of legal procedure. That was not justice. That was just process. My justice had to be public. It had to be immediate. It had to be a symbolic execution. "Doyle," I said, walking back into the library, We're holding one more reading of the will. Eden, the will is contested. I don't care about the will. I'm talking about a public hearing, a full audit, presented to the shareholders. And in this case, the shareholders are the public he lied to. I laid out the plan. Doyle, his eyes alight with a kind of terrified, righteous glee, made the calls. We prepared the house. It was no longer a home, but a stage. The final reading was set for the following day. The guest list was specific. I invited the Bayshore Beacon reporter who had received my tip. I invited the entire board of the Ashbourne Foundation, the one May had lied to. I invited a contingent of local decorated naval veterans, men who had served with Silas, to sit in the front row as a guard of honor, and my final, most important guests. I sent a bus to bring Mr. Evans and 20 of the teenagers from the real Harbor Light Youth Haven. They would be my witnesses. The stage itself was the grand hall. I had the staff, my staff, move all the furniture. I created an auditorium. At the front, where a podium should be, I had them place an easel, and on that easel, under a single, bright spotlight, I had them hang the portrait of me, the one from the press clippings, the one of Investigator Whitaker. It would be the first and last thing they saw. It was the evidence of who he, Silas, had really recognized as his heir. I knew May would make one last move. The night before the hearing, my security systems, the ones I'd had Alex help me install, pinged. A man in a utility uniform was at the power junction box for the estate, down by the main road. They were going to cut the power, plunge the hearing into chaos, but I had anticipated it. 2, diesel-powered. Film-grade generators were already humming behind the guest house. And I wasn't just recording the event. I had 3 separate, hardwired, multi-source live streams ready to go, each with its own bonded cellular backup. I was not just auditing his legacy, I was broadcasting its execution to the world. The morning arrived. It was gray, cold, and damp. The house was full of a tense, nervous energy. The veterans were stiff in their old uniforms. The journalists were sniffing, smelling the blood in the water. The kids from Harbor Light, wide-eyed and silent, looked at the marble and the gold, and I saw in their eyes the same hunger I had lived with. Every escape route was closed. Every legal avenue for May was blocked. Every piece of evidence was locked and loaded. And in that moment, as I stood on the landing, looking down at the stage I had built, the intercom from the nurses' station buzzed. It was Doyle, his voice low. "Eden, it's the Admiral. He's at the end. He's barely breathing. He's going." The day of my public victory was, at last, the day of his final defeat. I stood on the landing, my hand on the cold, polished banister, looking down at the stage I had built in the grand hall. The cameras were live, the veterans were seated. The children from Harbor Light, my witnesses, were watching with a silence that was more powerful than any testimony. The air was thick and cold. Upstairs, Silas was dying. Downstairs, his legacy was about to be executed. I walked down the stairs, not as a long-lost heir, but as the auditor-in-chief. I took my place, not at the podium, but beside the portrait of myself. Camden Doyle, his face carved from granite, stood at the podium. "This session is now open. We are here to bring clarity to the last will and testament of Admiral Silas Ashbourne." He did not pause. "Mr. Abernathy, you have reviewed the microdot document found in Ms. Whitaker's pendant against your own certified logs from June 10th, 2016. The terrified, bird-like notary, Mr. Abernathy, stood. His voice shook. They are a perfect match. The serial numbers, the watermark. It is the original, binding document. The will is valid." "And that will," Doyle's voice boomed, "names Ms. Eden Grace Whitaker as the sole inheritor of all personal assets and, crucially, grants her permanent, irrevocable veto power over the Ashbourne Foundation Board." A gasp went through the assembled board members before they could react. May's lawyer, Kingsley, leapt to his feet. "We reject this! This theater!" he shouted. "This microdot, this so-called will, is a fabrication. We have a more recent, more human document." May, her face a mask of desperate, final act bravado, stood. This is what he wanted, not this circus. She held up a single sheet of paper, a letter, in his own hand, from this morning. He is horrified by what this woman is doing. She handed it to Doyle, her hand trembling. "Read it. Read his final wish." Doyle took the paper, his expression unreadable. He read it. "I, Silas Ashbourne, being of sound mind, revoke all previous—" His eyes narrowed. "A forger's a forger. May," I said, my voice cutting through the hall. The live-stream camera zoomed in on me. May spun. "How dare you? This is his signature." "Is it?" I walked forward. "Or is it yours? Let's look at the G in Ashbourne, I imagine. It has a sharp tail, a little V tick at the bottom, the mark of a forger in a hurry, the same mark you left on the fraudulent codicil." May's hand flew to her mouth. Kingsley's face went white. "And," I continued, "I brought a friend." I gestured to a woman in the back. "A simple ultraviolet spectrometer. Your morning letter. The ink is still wet. May, it's not just a forgery. It's a forgery you committed in the last 30 minutes. While your uncle is upstairs dying, you are a ghoul, as well as a thief." May let out a sound, a high-pitched keen. "She's lying!" she shrieked at the board. "She's a liar! She's the one who lied! The DNA! She lied about the DNA! She's a fraud!" "The DNA," I said, walking to my laptop, which was connected to a massive screen on the wall. "I'm so glad you brought that up. You're right. It's confusing. My lab, your lab. Who to believe?" I looked at the assembled crowd, the veterans, the journalists. So let's hear from the man himself. I hit the play button on the anchor file. The screen lit up. Silas Ashbourne, not the ruin in the bed upstairs, but the vital, powerful man from 7 years ago, filled the hall. His voice boomed. "This is Admiral Silas Ashbourne. I am of sound mind." The room was in stunned silence as they watched him, in his own words, warn me, as he confirmed I was his blood, as he warned, with his own mouth, against the very plot May had just executed. "They will use DNA," his image said, staring down the lens. "They will try to use it to deny her. It will be their final, most convincing lie. Find the code." The video ended. The silence was absolute. May was catatonic, her mouth open. "He knew," one of the naval veterans in the front row said, his voice thick with emotion. "The old man knew." "He knew," I said, "and he knew who his enemies were." I turned from May to the other men at her table. I pointed to the pale, sweating man sitting next to Kingsley. "And you?" I said. "You're the state clerk, the one whose signature is in the secret logbook, the one who co-signed with Kingsley to make my orphan status permanent, to seal the file from the Admiral himself." The man looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I... How much did Vale Civic Strategies pay you?" "Mr. Harrison?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How much to bury a 7-year-old child in a bureaucratic tomb for the rest of her life?" It wasn't," she said, he stammered, looking at May. "She said it was a family matter, a security issue. The money was just a consulting fee." He had confessed, in front of the press, the board, and the veterans. "A consulting fee," I said, clicking the mouse. The screen behind me changed. It was the flowchart, the beautiful, damning simple flowchart I had built. "Here is that consulting fee," I said. "Here is the Ashbourne Foundation's money, flowing out to the Harbor Light Youth Haven." I pointed to Mr. Evans in the crowd. "A facility that received only 1/3 of the funds allocated. Where did the other 2/3 go?" "It went here." The chart showed the line. into a shell company, Vale Civic Strategies, which then consulted with Mr. Harrison and with Judge Miller, and with the entire corrupt machine of Bayshore. You weren't just stealing from Silas, you were stealing from the children you pretended to help. May was gone. The woman was just a shell. It's all lies, Kingsley whispered, but his voice had no conviction. Is it? I asked. Then you won't mind the final piece of evidence. I walked from the podium, through the crowd, and into the library. The doors were open. The live stream cameras followed me. I walked to the anchor bookshelf, pushed the 6 books, and the secret vault door side open. The crowd gasped. I stepped inside. I walked to the large, black, military safe, and in front of everyone, I used the heavy dark metal key Silas had given me. I turned it. The safe opened. It was not full of gold. It was full of ledgers. May and Kingsley, I said, my voice echoing from the vault, were amateurs. They were skimming. Silas? He was a professional. He owned the system. I pulled out a single, thick, leather-bound logbook and a stack of bank statements. May wrote her fraudulent codicil 30 days ago, trying to steal the foundation. But this, I held up the documents, is a bank transfer from 60 days ago, before his final decline. I held it up to the camera. It's a transfer of $50 million, the real scholarship money, moved from the foundation into a new, separate, private trust. I pointed to the name on the trust. The Eden Grace Whitaker Emancipation Fund. He had disinherited May and his entire corrupt board 2 months before they even knew the game was on. He just hadn't told them. He had let them walk right into my trap. A new sound. Sirens. Doyle, I saw, was on his phone. Yes, Attorney General, the confession has been made. The evidence is secure. Yes, you can send them in. 2 state troopers walked into the grand hall. The judge who had replaced Miller, who was watching the live stream from the courthouse, had already signed the order. The court was temporarily recognizing me as the legal heir and the guardian of the fund. The troopers walked to May, to Kingsley, to Harrison. May Ashbourne Vale, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, probate fraud, and evidence tampering. And in that exact, precise moment of my absolute victory, a new sound, a long, piercing, continuous squeal, the baby monitor on the podium, the heart monitor. The line had gone flat. The hissing had stopped. The room, the cameras, the police, they all vanished. I ran past the troopers, past a handcuffed, screaming May. I ran up the grand staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. I burst into his room. The medical team was already there, but they weren't moving. They were standing back. The nurse was crying. He was gone. I walked to the bed. I pushed past the nurse. His eyes were closed. The lines of pain, of fear, of cowardice. They were gone. He just looked. Small. I reached out, and for the first time, I touched him. I took his hand. It was still warm. I stood there, holding the hand of the man who had destroyed my life, and then given it back to me. And then I felt a flicker, a last, impossible, reflex. His eyes opened. Just a fraction. They weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, at the house. He whispered, a single, dry, rattling breath. Give it back. Give what back? I whispered, leaning in. The house, he breathed. To the children. The ones I stole. Start with you. His hand gripped mine, a last, fleeting pressure, and then he was gone. I stood there. The silence was total. Downstairs, I could hear the faint, confused sound of applause, the journalists, the victory, and then, as the news filtered, a sudden, respectful silence. The orbit had changed. I let go of his hand. I walked out of the room. I walked to the head of the stairs, to the small balcony that overlooked the grand hall. The crowd was silent. The veterans, the kids from Harbor Light, the press. They all looked up at me. The live stream cameras found me. I looked down at them, not as an auditor, not as an heir. "No child," I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the hall. "Deserves to be a file. No child deserves to be a ghost," a line in a fraudulent ledger, my grandfather. He built this house on secrets and lies, and he used it to bury one child. I looked at the kids from Harbor Light. His actions, and the actions of the people he trusted. They stole from all of you. I made the decision in that instant, the only decision, the only revenge that mattered. From this moment, the house is yours. A murmur. This library, I pointed to the vault, will no longer be a tomb of secrets. It will be open to the public. I looked at Doyle, who was staring at me, his eyes wide. "Mr. Doyle," I commanded, "you will draft the papers. Ashbourne House is to be dissolved. It is to be reformed, effective immediately, as a free legal and social advocacy center. For every at-risk minor in this state who has been buried by the system, my inheritance is their armor." The revenge was not in winning the money, it was in using it to destroy the machine, to take the thing that had imprisoned me and turn it into the key that would free others. The live stream cameras panned from my face, on the balcony, to the portrait of me, the auditor, hanging below, facing the American flag, the woman who had come looking for a family and had, instead, become the matriarch for a new one. I watched as the state troopers cuffed May. They led her, dazed and silent, directly past my portrait. I did not look at her. I looked at the kids from Harbor Light. They were smiling. The true enemy, the system that profits from erasing children, was finally, brutally, exposed. The lights in the grand hall, the ones for the cameras, flared to full brightness. A roar went up from the crowd. The cameras pulled back. They focused on my hand. I was holding the silver locket, the swallow. I closed it. A faint, definitive click. The truth was locked, not buried. It was locked in its proper heritage. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please, let me know where you are listening from in the comments. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the like button to help this story reach more listeners.